Smita Deorah's daughter was 6 months old when her mom started reading to her. And as she kept it up, her daughter lapped it up, becoming an independent reader even before learning to speak. At this point, most parents would have thought their child was special. Instead, Smita came to the conclusion that her daughter was just the same as most other kids. What was special was the fact that she was privileged enough to be exposed to the right stimuli and resources at a young age by her mother. This was one of the key motivators that drove Smita to start LEAD, an ambitious company that is trying to solve for better school education in India. Smita is LEAD's co founder and co CEO. Of India's nearly 280 million school going children, just around 5 to 8 million might be getting a quality education, she says. The rest are either in government run schools or affordable private schools that simply aren't equipped to engage their curious and boundless minds. Instead, they're subject to mindless rote learning, often by underpaid teachers and ill equipped administrations. To change that, you have to relook at everything, and I do mean everything: curriculum, pedagogy, technology, teaching aids, government policies, parent mindsets, and child psychology. Join me in this interesting conversation with Smita, who explains how she lives this mission. We talk about unique business models, working in education as parents, continuing to be a believer even when you're knocked down, and a lot more. This is episode 20 of First Principles, your fortnightly leadership podcast from the Ken. Smita, you and Sumit started LEAD, as I understand, based on a bunch of things that happened to your personal lives, etc. You as parents, your experiences with people who worked for you, and how they, send their children to school. The fact that Sumit's parents were teachers, etc. Tell us a bit more about these personal experiences that led the two of you to create LEAD.
Sure. Lead and the work that both of us do is a very, very personal journey for us. Uh, for Sumit, as you rightly mentioned, he comes from a family of teachers. He grew up in a very small town, was amongst those few rare kids who actually went to IMA, and then lived in Singapore, and hence he could see the difference between the opportunities that were available to kids who were coming from bigger cities, me being one of them, as compared to kids back home.
Which city did you grow up
Uh,
in?
I grew up in Mumbai, and hence his, especially from Singapore, every time he used to travel back, the gap that he saw in what was available to children in Singapore and what was available to kids, especially in small towns, was something that was glaring. And there is a teacher in him, and his passion was in that space, and he wanted to come back to India and do something about it. My journey was actually very personal and started from me being a parent. Of course, education was a dinner table conversation at our place because of Sumit's passion for it. I am a lot more scientific, as in I love researching. I love to know about neuroscience, brain science, and I was always very intrigued how humans develop, and hence these were conversations we both used to really like. Back in 2007, Sumit decided that he wanted to come back to India and work. I mean, do something in education here.
Were the
Uh,
two of you married then?
we were already married. We were, in fact, so we got married back in 2002, and we in that year were expecting our first child. It was an interesting return journey back home, where the trigger was his passion for education, but also this very important decision the two of us were making, that we will raise our child in India. And now for me as a parent, that's where the scientist in me sort of jumped in, because see, Singapore is amongst the top ranked PISA countries. PISA are these assessments and rankings that are done on quality of education. And India, the year before, I think
Been
a couple of
skipping it for
years,
a while.
yeah, has participated only once. And out of the 73 countries that participated, India was 72. So now, as a parent, I was very aware, or to be parent, I was aware that I'm going to raise my child in a country which is amongst the bottom, whereas Singapore was amongst the top 10. And hence, I sort of jumped in and started learning about it, and started learning about what can I do as a parent. And my first teaching experiences were actually with my own baby. So that is how my journey
If
began
I could
in
just
education.
interrupt you, what were the two of you doing in Singapore? Were both of you working? What
So
were
both of us were working in Procter and Gamble, P&G. Sumit was on the marketing side, brand side. I was on the finance side. In fact, I think the year we moved, I was recently promoted, so my boss was quite unhappy that I was moving back. It just felt right, to move back over here. And Sumit was very keen to be working in education. So we just said, okay, it's okay. Let's just pack our bags and go back.
So that decision that you made, now there are two decisions, right? The first is, of course, to move back to India. The other is both of you are working for one of the world's most well-known retail FMCG companies, long known for innovation, with a lot of structures and processes behind it, leadership, grooming, etc., to a completely new sector like education, where, granted, Sumit's parents may have been teachers, but neither of you had any experience. What made the two of you think that you could be entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, in a space you had absolutely no idea about?
Yeah. See, now this is interesting. So, one thing about both of us is that we both believe and take a lot of joy in learning. And we don't get stopped by things that we don't know. In fact, the more we don't know, the more intrigued we are, the more we're wanting to do something about it. I think here, uh, Sumit's passion at that point was, how can I change the way education is in this country? What can I do about it? My passion at that time was, I actually continued with PNG when we moved to India. My passion was, I'm going to be a parent. What is it that I can do for my child? What opportunities can I bring for my child? And I think we both were so passionate about these respective things that we researched and we read and we built skills around it. We did not let it stop us that we don't know. Secondly, entrepreneurship for both of us was not necessarily something that we planned will happen. It was, I would say, in some ways, at least for me, I would say it was out of compulsion. Compulsion because there was a problem I was seeing in front of me. I was not seeing solutions that could systemically solve that problem. And hence I said, hey, I just need to roll up my sleeves and jump in and see how far I go. So entrepreneurship is not something that I planned. It happened to me, and it's been a great learning experience and continues to be. So there's a lot of joy.
So, all this is valid, and I'm going to insert one of the questions that one of our listeners has sent, which I think is very important. How did you find your first 10 or 20 colleagues when you started, considering that both of you were coming from a completely different country, completely different organizations? Who were the first? You did not have existing anchors in education or ed tech, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So, how did you find your first 10 or 20 colleagues?
I'll bridge a little bit before I answer that question now more specifically. See, we came back in 2007, and the lead journey began in 2012. So over those 5 years, both of us had our own paths. Sumit joined this company called ZLearn.
So
as the
there was
CEO.
a
Yeah,
precursor.
there was a precursor. So he joined that company as the CEO. He took it. He really scaled that company, took it to listing, and that allowed him a lot of learning. In the meantime, of course, we developed an ecosystem of friends and people who were educators and who came from this space. I actually did a lot of side consulting assignments, but essentially from 2007 to 2010 immersed myself in early childhood learning. So it sounds crazy to people, but I
Was that
started
because
a
you were a parent or
because
because
I
you were
was a
preparing
parent.
yourself for
Because I was
entrepreneurship?
a
No.
parent, and I
All
think
right.
my journey towards entrepreneurship was fairly organic because I first started with my kid. I started a reading program with her at the age of 6 months. She was an independent reader even before she could speak. And then I discovered and I learned when I used those techniques that there's nothing special about her. It's just that she was
She got the stimulus,
yeah,
she
she
got the
got the
environment.
stimulus, and why can't we provide that to more kids? And in parallel, what happened was that, see, I grew up in Mumbai, but I had, during my growing up years, never paid attention to the slums that surround all these buildings. But, becoming a parent changed the lens through which I started looking at things. And while I did see poor kids, it didn't bother me as much or did not stand out as much till the date I realized in the car is this one child, but there is another child of the same age who is in very difficult conditions. So I think this also triggered questions in my mind that is my life only going to be about raising two kids? Or given that I have now a pool of savings and I am educated, is there something more I can do? And especially now that I was discovering things about how a young baby can learn. So I actually started a nonprofit in 2010, which was 2 years before the lead journey. And this was, and this is where entrepreneurship happened by chance. For almost 7 to 8 months, I must have met all of the possible large NGOs, hoping that maybe I'll join them and I will make a difference because I'd made up my mind that that is something that I find meaningful. But I was actually not very. I was a little disillusioned when I met people because what I found was that the mindset and the approach that most of these people, most of these nonprofits had was very incremental. See, India is a very large country and has lots of children, and the education problem is large and it's deep, so it's not an easy problem to solve. uh, what I saw was many of them, of course, for all the justified reasons, were looking at it as incremental change. Hey, these kids are not getting much, can we do a little more, can we do something more? Whereas my approach fundamentally has always been, you can't bring transformation unless and until you work vision backwards. So you actually design for excellence, you're not designing for poverty. You're not saying that, hey, this is where everyone is, let me do a little more. You say, this is where everyone should be, and hence what can I do to get everyone there? And you come up with a different set of ideas when you take that approach.
I agree with you, but I will also interject to point out that you must be faced with this very question in your organizational setting as well. The difference between reality versus vision. Do you build forwards from reality on an iterative basis, which you know is possible, or do you build backwards from an ambitious vision, knowing fully well that it's some parts of it are definitely going to fail?
Yeah.
How do you decide between the two? Because one is more real, where you can say that, look, we will definitely achieve this. The other one is more ambitious, but also less real, because you know that there are parts of it which are definitely going to fail. And with it, you risk possibly disillusioning some of the people who are with you on the journey as well. How do you make this decision?
See, in my mind, the decision is always the latter. The best way to build something, and I'll explain why I think so. The best way to build something is vision backwards, because the human mind is a very interesting. Human brain is a very interesting organ. Uh, we create what we imagine, and hence everything starts from imagination. When you imagine today forward, it's very constrained imagination, because you're already telling yourself this is all that's possible.
And you're accepting the reality.
You're accepting reality. But disruptive things don't come from accepting reality. Now, when you work vision backwards, you say, hey, this is what I want to create. We said when we started Lead, we want to create a world where kids in small towns or in government schools or any of these schools are able to get the same quality of education that a child in Singapore is able to get, or a child in Finland, which are the top ranking PISA countries, and a child in a big city in a Mumbai IB school is able to get. That's the vision. When we work backwards from there, a world of possibilities open up for you. And I think a lot of innovation that we did in Lead over the last 10, 11 years of the journey came about only because of that. Now, are there failures along the way? Are there tough learnings along the way? Absolutely. I think the important thing in that journey is to know that you've taken up an audacious goal, and that it will require perseverance. It will require you to not get bogged down by failure. It will require you to be thinking creatively for every problem, and you'll get there. And I think some of the best things in the world that were created by people were not from incremental thinking. So I'm a very deep believer of vision backwards, and that's what we speak to people about even within the organization today. I mean, I remember the most recent example I'll give you. 2 3 years back, three years back, I was seeing that coding had become mainstream. Actually, coding was mainstream part of school core curriculum in most of the developed countries. My own children had started learning coding in their international school in Mumbai at grade 1. And my first reaction to it was, why are we giving devices so soon? And I remember spending time with their teacher, and it was a fascinating learning experience for me, because the teacher explained to me that, see, they are going to be consumers of technology. Now, either they can be blind consumers to it, or they can be aware consumers, which means they know what's going behind. And then if we make them creators, then they will continue to have a lot more power on this technology versus them being a victim of the technology. Now, that made a lot of sense to me. Now, when I was seeing that, my first response also was then, why is this not, if my kid needs it, why doesn't every child need it? So I remember talking to my team and saying that, hey, we need to teach our kids coding. And the maximum price that we can charge our parents is 150 rupees, because they today buy a computer science book
This
at
is a
that
monthly
cost.
price?
This is a
Monthly,
book
the
full
100
year,
and... Oh,
150 rupees for the
right.
whole year. Because they buy they used to buy a computer science book at that price. So I told them, see, that's all they afford. They don't afford more than this. So if a parent is buying it for 150, 200, 250, whatever that number is, right? Then that is what we have to now at that price point teach coding. And the first response from the team was, how is that even possible? And I said, but that's exactly why all of us are here. Like, we are truly innovators if we can make it happen. And they did. We launched a coding and computational skills program, which is used by almost 3,000 schools now in the remotest of towns, and these kids are coding in that school environment, for which the school, I mean, the school is paying us barely 150 rupees, and the parents are paying them that much. Whereas we know that, a lot of other coding programs were charging more. Now they're targeted towards different parents. But I'm just saying that this is an example that over the last 10 years with Lead, actually, I've become an even more firm believer that vision backwards thinking might in the beginning sound foolish to people, but I think it's the foolish believers who actually innovate. So, I'm okay to be at that end of the
To
spectrum.
paraphrase Steve Jobs, from what you said, it looks like what you're doing is at the intersection of two overlapping circles. One is a very ambitious vision, the way you think about what's possible, and the other is a very sharp set of constraints, which is the reality of
So you're
Yeah.
trying to innovate at the intersection of these two. As from your example,
Yeah.
how do we teach coding or anything else to a large number of students who can't afford it? And the constraint comes from the fact that the reality is India, where a large number of these students come from families that cannot afford to pay exorbitant prices for it. So it's that constraint,
Absolutely.
and innovation
Absolutely.
that happens is at that intersection.
Absolutely, yeah. So in fact, I think the lead product team, I think for us, if I speak for the team, the way we think about this is that we want to bring every child must learn, and the benchmark of learning is fairly high for us. So we, our promise to schools, and we've been doing this quite well now, is we build confident kids who have deep conceptual understanding, who have thinking skills, communication skills, collaboration skills, and the exposure to really conquer this world. And hence, we sort of set learning outcome benchmarks which are at parity with some of the top schools. And then we say, hey, we want to deliver that in an environment that is constrained. And the constraints are the parent has a certain ability to pay. They're not going to be able to pay more. So, how do we make it affordable? uh, that community has a certain type of teachers, typically low skill, low exposure, because they themselves are a victim of that system. So how do we get this teacher in this environment to actually deliver that learning? And that is what lead does. And we basically offer an integrated education solution to
That
schools.
would have been my next question. How
Yeah.
would you describe what
Yeah.
lead is in a line or
So,
two?
yeah, so LEAD basically provides an integrated school system to schools to develop confident children. And what we do for that is we provide them holistic curriculum all the way from nursery to grade 10. We provide them holistic curriculum that builds those skills in children. Uh, we provide them technology, especially we provide technology to teachers for this low skill average teacher to become, or for her to teach like an exceptional teacher, like some of the best teachers would teach in really good schools. And we provide the tech layer for the school, and especially for all the stakeholders who are making the decision for the child, which is the teacher, the principal, the school owner, the parent, for all of them to actually get empowered with data and recommendations that will help them make decisions that is right for the child's growth, versus debates, or versus even gathering data. So for example, assessment and performance data, which basically leads them on remedial path. It allows personalization for the students. So that's what we do
So,
at the
is
school.
this at the end of the day, how the way it works is lead a set of software programs that you install for a particular school that subscribe to it, and then the teachers and the students and their families, etc., get
Yeah.
some version of that
Yeah.
on their
So
apps?
there are three
Because you
layers if you
said
have to.
curriculum also.
Yeah. So if you think about it, there are three layers. It is, we provide a lot. It's pretty much like we're the Intel inside in a school. The deepest layer are the curriculum layers. So that means everything that gets taught in the school, the content and everything is provided by us,
Let
which
me
is
understand that, because
books
there is
and
a
yeah.
curriculum which is prescribed by the board that a school belongs to. So your curriculum is in some senses what, a plus plus over that? Is it like an aggregate of across like what is the lead
Yeah.
curriculum as distinct from the board
So
curriculum?
what the board now, this again, is a bit of a misconception. Uh, Actually, in India, the thing is that the schools have a good amount of autonomy on the curriculum. The board prescribes the lowest level, says at least this much must happen, and the board takes exit examinations at grade 10. Now some of the boards have started taking at grade 8 just to check where the students are. But that's what the board does. Many of the boards do provide textbooks, but mostly government schools use it, not private schools. So what we do is we basically we do plus plus, as you said. So we've benchmarked versus some of the leading countries, and you've said how do we bring that for our kids. So our curriculum is a significant upgrade to what the bare minimum would be prescribed by the board. So we provide that in the form of books, digital content that gets used in the classroom, assessments, practice at home, everything that a child needs. And then we have the software layer above it, like you were saying. So every stakeholder has one end of the software with a central system that powers it, right? So the school has an ERP system, the teacher has has a software for herself, an app for herself, the parent has, and the school principal has. There is another layer that we had to add on the top, which is the hardware layer. So we also provide the hardware to the schools, because we realize that we are working in small town India where they don't have access to these devices. So how do we enable the classroom to now become a multimodal classroom, which means that learning is not only with the book and a blackboard, but there is a digital device in the classroom. So we actually install TVs in every classroom, and we give the teacher a tablet where she has access to all the content, and the TV and the tablet create a smart class experience within the classroom. So we provide all these layers, and it's been a journey.
What has been, that would have been my next question, that it looks like you're trying to solve for the full stack. You're trying to
Yeah.
solve for hardware.
Yes.
You're trying to solve for software. You're trying to solve for curriculum.
Yes.
I'm sure it was not this ambitious when you started,
It
where you
wasn't.
would have thought we are going to solve for X. Then when you started solving for X, you realized that we got to solve for Y.
Yes, absolutely.
What was that sequencing that happened with lead?
So the journey was interesting, right? So I told you I'll go all the way back to, I was looking for jobs, and then I was disillusioned, and I said, okay, I'll start my nonprofit. And the first thing I did was created a school in the box solution for Anganwadis, which are preschool centers, and that started giving me some ideas. Sumit was questioning his return back to India, because Z-Learn mostly catered to more affluent families, and his heart still was lying in the heartland of India on small towns, because he was not seeing that change. So I sort of convinced him to leave, or he convinced me to move, either ways. So in 2012, we actually first set up a school in a village. That is where our journey began.
Where?
So this was in this village called Mehmedabad. It is some 30 kilometers before Ahmedabad. It used to be an overnight journey from Mumbai. A very dear friend had some, family property, and they wanted to use it for something good. Uh, we went around and we looked at all the schools in that area, and we were like, oh, this is exactly the problem, and we want to do something different here. So we set up a school there, and that's where the journey began. I remember first day of that school, we had 14 children. Those 14 kids, 10 out of them recently passed out of 10th with flying colors. And this is a rural place. I mean, mostly kids came from farming background. And the early adopters were those parents who basically just trusted Sumit and me, because their kids were learning nothing in the school. The kids were lagging behind in class, and the teachers had pretty much told them nothing can be done for them, because these were classrooms with 50, 60 kids. So the parents felt that something good can happen here. These people look
How
good.
can it get worse?
It can't get worse. And those kids speak fluently in English. They all are doing exceptionally well. You would not even come to know that they belong to a village. So that's where we began our journey. We set up that school. We from building the classrooms to painting the classrooms to teaching to putting up the entire infrastructure. Everything we did, and our first layers, to be honest, were the curriculum layers, right? Because we said, we started using a lot of the books that were available in the market. And then we realized it's not designed for this audience. It assumes that the child is fluent with English. It also assumes that the teacher is fluent with English. But here in rural Gujarat, that's not a reality, because these kids have no exposure to English. So they needed something different. So the first layers that we created was an English program, which in fact today is the flagship program of LEAD. It's called English Language and General Awareness. It basically, you know, basically helps a child build English language skills at a very rapid pace, which means, on an average now for 7, 8 years, we've seen that kids build 1.5 to 1.6 years of English skill within one academic cycle. In the same context in which they've been studying, where the teacher English skills are also poor. Now, when I say skill development, means we actually give them while assessing them, give them a completely new text. They haven't read it before. They read it independently. They answer very deep questions about it independently. So we know really that they've learned language. So it started with English, and then we built math and sciences and a lot of different subjects for our students there. Then in 2016, this was working really well. Our kids were doing very well. We could see, we were in school all the time, so we could see the transformation. We both used to do a lot of back and forth because we had two kids back home, two babies back home, who we were raising in Mumbai and not in Gujarat. 2016, once we knew that this model was working, we decided to set up more schools. So we set up four more schools in Maharashtra, again, all remote areas, small towns, taluka areas. And that's when we built our first technology layer. We said, hey, if we are in Mumbai and we are managing a lot of schools and we want to spread this, then this cannot happen with our physical presence. So how do we communicate with our teachers? So we created, the content management system
At this
layer.
point, are you funded? How are you
We were
funding
still
this?
self-funded, so we were we were still using our savings. We were our first investors. I think it paid off. We also fundamentally believe that if we don't invest in ourselves, then who will, right? So we have to be the first ones to take the punt. So we had still not raised money at that time. Not no We not raised institutional money or outside money. We did have family who put in a little bit. So we set up these four schools, and that was our first
They were
tech
called
layer.
lead schools.
They were called lead schools. And we coined the term lead at that point of time. Lead stands for leadership in education and development. We coined the term when we opened these schools. And I remember still the teacher app that we, which is our now leading product. Teacher app wireframes were made on tissue paper by Sumit, and we had this engineer who used to work out of his home, who created this for us. And the first time we launched the teacher app, it was in a room full of teachers who were working in our schools. 100 of them, maybe 100 of them. I remember we thought we'll have to train them, and they all just got the app with them, and they all just moved with it. Sumit and me were just dumbstruck for 7 minutes, 8 minutes, because no one was listening to us. And then basically they just got up and there was a standing ovation, because they were like, this just simplifies our life. I just cannot forget that moment. We created it so that we see our teachers teach well. What we discovered was that this was joy for the teacher, because this teacher was otherwise struggles in the classroom. And she was now, saying that, hey, this simplifies my life. Eventually, a year later, when we moved to the partnership model, there was this teacher who in Marathi said, Shikshan Mitra. This is the teacher's best friend, because now it tells me what I'm supposed to do. It gives me demo classes. It tells me now play this video. It tells me go now teach from here. It's so fantastic, because now my kids get it. And my classroom is fun because there is TV and the children are able to see some nice animations on the TV. So that's what happened. So 2016 to 17 journey was that. We also at that point of time explored some partnership models, which was mostly word of mouth. People
Because at
in
this
the
point, you're still trying to think about scaling as
still-
creating more schools that you are
Yeah,
managing and
yes,
running.
yes.
That
And
changed some point.
yes.
Because that seems to be incompatible with your earlier stated vision of achieving scale. Because
Achieving
anything
scale,
in a country
exactly.
like India that requires you to set up physical assets and grow is automatically limited by capital,
Absolutely.
speed of execution, etc.
Absolutely. So 2016 and 2016, we saw fantastic results across all the schools. So now we said, okay, now we have to now, fork in the road. We have to make up our mind. How do we go about it? See, both of us were salaried people. We come from fairly humble backgrounds. So it was not like we had wealth for us to be buying properties and things like that. And hence, we knew that if we go the path of setting up more own schools, at best in our lifetime, we'll get to 2030. But if we go the partnership route, then there is hope for a significantly larger scale. And scale was definitely on our mind, because 280 million school going children, only 8 million maybe get good quality education, the rest are not. And that is a problem we really want to solve. So that's when we went the partnership route. that is when we raised money for the first time. So we did our Series A straight away. We had a working model. We had some partnerships. We now wanted to scale this partnership model and really test out our GTM. So that's when we raised money for the first time. And in the first year,
What
we
was
signed.
your go-to-market model, which you just said you wanted to
Yeah.
test your GTM?
Our GTM was basically how do we find similar profile school owners in the same fee segment, what we now call affordable,
Private
yeah,
schools.
private school
What
segment.
is this fee segment?
So these are normally English medium schools in small towns, and they tend to be in the fee range of 12,000 per annum all the way up to maybe around 35,000 per annum, depending on the geographic location. You're closer to a larger city, your rentals and infrastructure and overall operational expenses are more. So these schools will be around 30,000, but otherwise, in rural areas, they'll be around 12 to 15,000 per annum
Before we move
fees.
on from this, I want to ask you a question about English medium. We've seen the narrative around English medium kind of explode in many ways over the last maybe like 5-10 years or so. I want to ask you your personal observations because you've been all over India seeing schools. My understanding is that the large percentage of Indians still value English medium education because they see it as a ticket to a better career or a better future for their children. But the reality also is that they want something which often interferes with the education of their children unless it's remedied, because great education happens when you're not struggling to comprehend what the teacher is trying to teach you, right? And so
Yeah,
often it's
yeah.
it's the language that you're most comfortable with, your mother tongue. How do you see this
Yeah.
play out today, I mean, from the point of view of both parents as well as children?
Yeah. See, I'm a realist, and we have to take the pragmatic approach here, which is that it is true that uh, children have to learn English, and that is because all high quality higher education in the country is available in English. I mean, unless we have IITs in multiple local languages, unless we have IIMs in multiple local languages, we are not creating a pathway for these children to succeed. If we don't
And
bring English
workplaces.
and
And workplaces,
workplaces,
because what happens
right?
after that, you end
Now,
up in
in
workplaces.
India, practically it's very difficult to have local language higher education because it's a very diverse country. It works in countries in Europe,
Like,
right? Like
or
Germany,
China,
it's
for
okay, yeah.
instance,
So, it works there, but it does not work here. Now,
because they're single language countries,
yeah,
broadly single
mostly
language.
single
Yeah.
language. So you go to Finland, Finland is Finnish. They learn English, but they don't need to know English to be at the workplace. They don't need to know English to do their higher degrees. But in India, you need to. The moment you get into an engineering college, like how do you get into an engineering college? How do you get into medical? Like how do you do all these professions? So you're not going to be ready for anything if you don't know English. Now, as an educator, and basic science tells us that when children are very young, they have the ability to learn multiple languages. So, delaying language learning to an older age is actually wrong for the child. So, if ultimately we all have to learn English, the best thing is actually to introduce English very, very early. So, in pre primary age groups, that means from the age of 0 to 6, a child has the ability to learn 5, 6 different languages. And we've seen that in multi language
That's
households,
true.
right? Parents are from different parts of the country, different languages. Kids pick up all these languages. So, actually, the solution, the problem in the system is that they eventually have to learn it, but then we're not doing a very good job of it in the early years. Now, the way English is taught in the country is the problem. We teach English like it was taught during the Britishers' era. We are not native English speakers. The way native English speakers, or those who, for whom English is their mother tongue, you would teach language very differently. But if that is not a language
Help me
which is your mother
understand what's the
tongue,
difference.
so the difference is that, see, children pick up language intuitively when they're very young by listening. Now, when they're listening, they are associating words with things. Like they are let's say I say daddy, right? And I'm looking at this person and I know this relationship, I think I understand it, and this relationship is called daddy. And there is no other person I'm calling daddy. So, they'll, like some animal or something else, like a table or a desk. That is how they associate and they learn language. But the way we teach language now is that the kid will come to school and the first thing that we'll start teaching them is ABCD, and which is pretty much like, if I put a table in front of a child, I'm actually not showing the table, I'm saying leg and, front, leg one and leg two. And then eventually 2 years later, I put it together and say, hey, by the way, you're supposed to know this makes a table. That's not how it works. Now, if a child, for example, is already, has English in their context, they already have an intuitive understanding of that language. So when they come to school, you can actually just start reading and you can start using that language because they already know good part of it, and you build vocabulary from it. But when you're bringing children who are non-English speakers into now a classroom where they have to build skills of English, you have to start very differently. So what you have to do is you have to start now giving English names to things that they know in life. So for example, a very simple thing that every lead classroom will do is that all the natural things that they know in their classroom, we will label it with English words. So they will see their table every day with the word table.
And that association
And
through
that
repetition is
association,
built up.
yeah, and the teacher just says it and that it builds. Now, whether they can spell table does not matter. We don't need them to spell it. It's like I grew up in a Hindi speaking household. I did not know how to do Hindi spellings till I was in grade 2 or 3. It didn't matter. No one said, I don't know the language. I knew the language because I could understand and I could speak in Hindi. But unfortunately, in schools, kids get labeled that they don't know English if they can't spell words.
This goes back to the point that you earlier made about curriculum design.
Yeah.
Is the point that you're making that our traditional curriculum was designed that you have to first know ABCD
Yes.
before you get to
Yes,
talk in fluent
absolutely,
sentences,
absolutely.
whereas actually it should be backwards.
Absolutely.
And in that earlier curriculum, one of the reasons why you said it's at a very low setting, so children who are actually perhaps more sophisticated and advanced in their understanding of English are artificially shown as bad because they can't do something that, like, they're not supposed to be doing
Absolutely.
logically.
So what we did was we actually broke down English language and we said, hey, if you have to build skills, we Elga breaks it down to different components. So we teach phonics. Phonics helps with sounds and letter sound recognition and then putting it together. It aids reading eventually. But unless a child knows the sound of every letter and how that changes when two letters come together, they can't become independent readers. Then we have another segment that we do called whole words. Whole words is where they associate words with natural things that has meaning in their life. Like I gave you the example of table. So they'll start with simple things that they see in their environment, table, chair, pencil, mother, father, whatever, right? So they build vocabulary by knowing what things are called and people are called in English. Then we have something that we call reading and comprehension. Reading and listening comprehension. Now, reading and listening comprehension takes phonics skills and whole word skills and now starts putting it in sentences to get them to read interesting stories that have meanings. Both read it, listen to it, and
This
they build
sounds a lot
comprehension.
like how even adults learn using, for instance, Duolingo or something like that, right?
Absolutely. But
It's the
that's not
same
how
principle,
schools used to
yeah.
teach it. I mean, that's not how I learned English. And I know I struggled with it in the beginning because I didn't come from an English speaking household. My parents knew Hindi. They had learned English, but they were not fluent with it. So we do reading and listening comprehension, and then we do grammar, which helps them learn rules
The
to be
rules.
able to
So the
write
rules
and
come at the
speak.
end rather than at the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah. And we do writing and speaking expression. Now writing also is interesting, right? So I learned this. See, I in the first 4 years from 2012 to 2017, 18 maybe. So I love learning and I always immerse myself in learning some of these new things so that we're designing things well for students. So I visited thousands of schools, which are amongst the top schools in the country. I spent a week in Finland because it's one of the top ranked PISA countries and visited multiple schools there to see what are the approaches they're using. I went to Harvard Graduate School of Education. I said, okay, I'm not from this space. You asked me this question. I was very aware that I'm not from this space. But that, I think, was an advantage because I didn't have biases. I did not have a belief I know. I knew I don't know, and I was very curious. So I went and learned from the best. I went there, I came back. Sumit did something similar. So we both took different learning experiences. We would bring it back together, and then we started creating our curriculum. So a lot of what we do with ELGA actually is inspired by the Singapore framework. Singapore
I'm
was an
sorry, this is the second
interesting.
time you're using the word ELGA.
ELGA
What's
is
ELGA?
English language and general awareness.
All right.
It's the flagship product, as I was saying. A lot of schools choose lead because ELGA is transformative for them.
I'm a little confused now because
Yeah.
you've used this phrase, this is one of our leading products, this is one of our flagship products. And the way I'm confused because I see it as a school chooses to use lead or not. It seems like a binary. So
Yes.
then what are
Yes.
these sub products within that which are popular, etc.?
Yeah.
Are these products that, like Elga for instance,
So
are they
yeah, I
available
think it's maybe.
independently at self,
Yeah.
or
So no,
is
it's
it just
it's
your
maybe a
internal
more.
metrics?
It's more my internal language. Maybe you're absolutely right that a school chooses to partner with lead or
And
not.
they get access to all your
They get
software.
access to everything, but very often schools choose us because of ELGA. So the school will be like, my kids are not very good with English. See, English is also a barrier often in all other subjects. So if a kid does not know English well, as you were rightly saying, they will not understand anything in the math class or the science class. So English is very foundational. So a lot of schools choose us because of the power of the ELGA program, saying that if they do this well, then everything else will go well. Now, of course, I'm also the one who created ELGA, so maybe when my team listens to this, they'll be like, Smita, you're always partial to it. Sumit is the one who made the math and the sciences curriculum, between the two of us. So maybe you're hearing a little more, but I think it's. I also said this because it was very important for the initial part of the journey because we realized that English was the barrier for everything, and hence we first had to solve the English
So
problem.
what if
So
English being the barrier for everything is the reason why we don't do so well as a country on a global standardized test like PISA, which essentially again comes down to, so because
yeah.
I'm just going by what you're
No,
saying
so
that
the interesting thing is PISA is taken by different countries in their native languages. The reason why we are not doing very well in these international standard assessments that happen is that they are all application oriented. We are
we are theory
honestly, if I'm
oriented.
being very, very honest, we are not preparing our kids to be thinkers. We're not preparing our children to be independent thinkers, independent, they're unable to apply their learning. We promote rote learning in schools, and that is what made us both sad and angry at the same
It's
time.
not just schools. I mean, if you go to post-adult state, a significant portion of our quote unquote edtech industry is devoted to cracking exams, which is an
Yeah,
adult version of
yes, yes,
rote learning itself.
yes.
I mean, you
And
talked
that
about
is,
Finland
yeah.
as a great example. I don't think anyone looks at Finns as they're great at cracking entrance exams.
And I
No
think,
one.
yeah, and I think the cracking the exams is just an entry into something, right? But the point is that ultimately, national growth, GDP growth is going to come only if human capital is ready to innovate.
And that's a
And our
problem
human capital is not ready to innovate.
because we see that. So you keep deferring it. You have these exams, rote exams in school, then you have these rote exams at a college level, at a post college level, and then we talk about there is a skills gap when Indians
Absolutely.
are entering the
Yeah.
workforce and companies complain that look, this person may be an engineer, but their actual level of knowledge or ability to apply is much lower.
Yeah. And that honestly has been our own personal journey. If I reflect back on my own journey, I actually learned a lot more and I started understanding things and developed some skills when I did my CA. Because CA gets you to apply. You work while you're studying. And that was a world of difference for me. And then I realized, well, I lack a lot of core skills. So I learned communication, I learned both written and spoken communication, all the tough way on the job. And I saw this when I went to PNG and I started recruiting people. I saw that that was a challenge. Now we see enough numbers. I mean, you see how companies have programs where they first get people, train them for a year, like Infosys and all done that. I mean, do that. It's because people are not ready, and we have skilling programs now on top. But the core problem is that the school education is not preparing these children for life.
But
School
like you said, that's a
education,
much tougher problem to
it
solve.
is a tougher problem to solve, and that's what we are trying to solve. And both of us are very, very aware that we're not going to be able to solve all of it in our lifetime, especially given the size of the problem in India. And hence, as we started scaling this, our vision started moving towards how do we create an institution that continues to do this work well after we are not there. And that's where lead started. I mean, lead is that vision now, that how do we set up this organization and institution that outlasts the two founders, because we're not going to be able to achieve this in our lifetime. I mean, see, out of 280 million children today lead impacts 5 million through 9,000 schools. To some people, it's a very
These are
large
schools that
number.
are signed up with LEAD
Yeah, so
and
these
are
9,000
run
schools.
with LEAD's curriculum,
Yeah, so
software,
now
etc.
we have two different types of solutions in our portfolio. We have Lead, the way I described it. We recently acquired a business, Pearson India's K-12 business. Now, Pearson is an MNC. It's a company which has been in the space of education for a long time, and they largely work through publications, school textbooks and publications which have blended learning for the slightly higher fee segment.
When you say blended learning, what does that mean?
Blended learning is basically, it's largely anchored on the textbook, but they also provide a lot of digital content
Okay.
to the
Like in
school.
the older days, it would be having a CD insert
CD, yeah. So now,
with this thing. Now I'm
Now
sure
of
like
course
no
it's
one has
QR
a
code
CD.
and
Got
app
it.
and things
All
like
right.
that. So it's not really the full lead solution. It's a subset of it, but they target a different set of schools. So both of these together now are used by 9,000 schools across the country, with 5 million students actually
Right.
benefiting from
I
it.
skipped a bunch of questions because we
Sure.
were in a conversation, but I want to talk to you about LEAD. How does LEAD make money?
So we basically, we're a B2B SaaS business. So that means we sell to schools, we sign long-term contracts with the school, and they pay us typically on a per student basis. Now, schools charge parents, they charge parents fees and also for the books. So eventually the school passes it on to the parents.
So
right?
you
So it's
do
part of
provide
the
books as well.
We do provide books as well. So we, in a simple way, whatever school fees a parent is paying to the school, a small part of it comes to us for all of the products and services we provide them. And that's really our revenue model.
This model has gone through a set of evolutions in India of trying to go to a school and digitize it and modernize it. I don't want to go into names. Companies have been started, they've failed multiple times, right? So has the needle shifted in how, let's say, I would say you're probably the second or third generation of companies to try and digitize schools and make them quote unquote smarter?
Yeah.
How has the needle moved in how companies like you approach this, or what didn't work? Again, I'm not asking you.
No,
I'm
I
sure you
understand.
know
Yeah.
some of the companies that
Of
I'm talking
course.
about, but I don't
Of
want to
course.
make it
See,
personal. How has it changed?
if I keep aside any company governance related issues, right?
Sure.
That's those are table stakes. Everyone has to have strong governance. If I just put that aside, I think what that solution could reach only some schools, and beyond that, it did not show outcomes. See, ultimately, whatever solution you're providing to the school, we must know that student outcome must be visibly delivered. If student outcome is not going to be delivered visibly to the parent is not going to be happy with the school, and the school hence is not going to be happy with you. These solutions were helpful, but what happened was, or what happens is that they are disconnected from the rest of the things that a teacher uses. So it requires a high skilled teacher to take a book from publisher A and then digital smart class solution from player B and then put them together,
So you're
because
saying the full stack is required.
so the
It
full
cannot
stack
be.
is required for The APS segment. See, if it's a high skill teacher in this really fancy school in Bangalore city, she's smart enough to figure this out. But that is not the case for most of the teachers in the country and most of the schools. In the affordable segment, what happens is that this teacher herself has low skills. So this is too complex for her. She can't put these things together. So an integrated system actually simplifies her life. So we bring everything together, and that actually simplifies life for the teacher. So learning happens.
Got
And
it.
for the school owner, this is a lot more affordable because those solutions were not even as scalable and affordable. They were very expensive. Schools, typically if a school, I think at the cost at which it would put a smart class solution in one classroom, now with the lead solution, they will be able to digitize 5 classrooms. And that cost differential also is the barrier that we
So
broke.
if you were to look at the entire, how many schools are there in India right now, approximately?
In India, 1.5 million schools,
So if you were to
1 million
put
are
them,
government and
got it.
500,000
If you were
private
to put
schools.
them into some sort of a pyramid, what you seem to be saying is that it's the middle to bottom of the pyramid where you can create the maximum improvement through standardization. Because, I mean, what you're
Yeah.
essentially doing through your complete stack is you're trying to provide a, a higher value standardized curriculum, software, and like, the layer above, versus right at the very top where you said if it's a private school in Bangalore, maybe standardization doesn't benefit them. Is that a
Yeah.
way to kind of?
So I would replace the word standardization with integration. Very
Hmm.
often, when we provide a solution, people misinterpret that we're standardizing. We're
Hmm.
actually personalizing. Technology has the power to personalize, and I'll
At a
explain
student
how.
level
At a
or a,
student level or at a classroom level. Uh, but what this does is it integrates. Integration actually brings a lot of power into this ecosystem. So, first, if I sort of zoom out, the pyramid, just to share some context and numbers with you, out of 1.5 million school, 1 million schools are government schools. 500,000 are private now. Out of the 500,000 schools, only around 50, 60,000 schools are this high fee schools in the metros, above 50,000 fee. The rest are all below that. The rest are all 450,000 schools with almost 170 million kids are,
and that's the market
and
that
that's the big market.
got
So
it.
here is the thing, these parents are paying money to a school because they want better education than a government school. But in effect, because the kids are rote learning from these textbooks, they are not getting better education than a government school. And the parent is not even aware. The parent comes to know about it only when the child is ready to come out and go into college. And that's when they realize, well, my child is not ready.
And even
So
if
what
they
do I
were
do?
aware, I would assume that for an Indian parent, it's a huge decision to take a kid out from a private school and put them back into a government school because,
Because private,
yeah.
at least, see, the private schools are a little better than government schools for sure. At least the teacher is there and the teacher is doing something. And of course, there are pockets of schools who have done good work, because they're also entrepreneurs, and those, some of those entrepreneurs have done good work. That being said, when I say that, I say it more, as a sweeping statement for scale, right? Like
Yeah.
most of them are not delivering very high quality. And then when they buy these disintegrated solutions, their teachers and their staff is not able to put it together. And that is the one thing that I have heard so often from school owners. And actually, it's, see, look at this. We were school owners. We tried all these products. It didn't work for our students. So we're just school owners who, instead of, saying we will only do this for our school, we built this for everyone. And that's how we see our journey. So we completely understand what the school owners are going through. Because they are unable to piece these things together. So integration is the power. And
Is that your differentiation as well in the market vis-a-vis
absolutely,
competitors? Like, are there?
there aren't any direct competitors, to be honest. In fact, when we came with the integrated school system back in 2017, when we started scaling, we were the only ones. And of course, we are the largest who provide that. In 2019, we figured, as we were fundraising and talking to investors, that systems and integrated systems are actually prevalent in some other parts of the world, especially in South America. and they were very successful models. I think that actually gave us a lot more conviction that, hey, there is massive opportunity to scale here. There was a lot to learn from them on how do you ensure that when you're scaling, the systems are simple. There are, how are you providing a variety of solutions, because all schools cannot teach in the same manner. Teachers are different. So there are a lot of these personalization and multiple curriculum options that we came up with over time. So we're the only ones, and our competitors are multiple, I would say. Typically publishers, we'll end up replacing them. We'll end up replacing Smart Class. We'll end up replacing assessment solutions, teacher training programs, because the school gets everything from us. That being said, if I'm being very honest, I think our biggest competition is inertia in India, where school, especially if a school is doing well, they feel I don't need to change. What
It's
I'm
just an
doing
additional
is fine.
cost.
It's a
It's
machine
just,
I'm
yeah.
churning. And, that is something that changed with COVID, dramatically changed with COVID, where schools as SMEs were largely not digitized. And I think the school owners became aware that, hey, we have to come out of this analog system that we are in. And that actually has given a lot of power also to our growth. So in fact, we grew we grew exponentially through COVID. And then many people asked us, like they do with the other edtech, because edtech in India has
Yeah.
unfortunately become synonymous to B2C, whereas most of the education happens inside institutions. So edtech is a much broader term.
Got it.
But post COVID, in fact, many people asked us, "Oh, you must have seen a business decline." And I said, "No, COVID was the worst period for us because schools were shut. Now is our time." So actually, we have seen that post COVID, schools are a lot more keen and open because they've realized that they have to digitize. And the second thing that's happened is parents have become very aware, because parents were seeing what technology can do.
They almost have that, I think, the trauma of, I mean, I say this as
Yeah.
a parent myself, of what happened during 2020, 2021. And you're like, look, this can happen again. And like, we need to be
Absolutely.
prepared
See,
for
the
it.
other
Children
thing
need to be
is that the
prepared.
parents pre COVID never had an insight into the classroom. As a parent, you didn't know what the teacher is
That's
doing.
true. And now the
Now, when the
classroom came
classroom is
into your
here,
home,
you
the
knew the
office
teacher
came
is
into
good
your
or
home.
not.
That's right.
And many school owners face this problem where their teachers were not good. So,
Yeah.
now here is a system that helps your teacher become far better. So the parental demand has changed, and hence, we see that, this is just the right time for a solution like ours to scale.
And a couple of other questions. How old is Lead now?
Lead is now 11 years old. We just celebrated our 10 years in
Congratulations.
a
How
few
many
months back.
employees are there at Lead?
We are around 1,500 now, 1,500 employees.
How much venture capital have you raised today?
We've raised $170 million since 2017.
And what were you last valued at publicly?
Our last valuation was 1.1 billion. This was our last round back in a year back, early
Do
2022.
you talk about your revenue in public?
Yeah, normally we don't, but I can share here. See, the ARR equivalent is, because we're not a monthly revenue business, we're
Just
an
the annual
annual.
recurring
Yeah,
revenue.
yeah, yeah. So for us, we call it annual contract value. We're around 450, 500 crores this
How
year.
old are you?
How old am I? 45.
You said you have two kids.
I have two kids.
What are their names and how old are they?
Zoya, she's 15 and she's grade 10. And Anay, he's 13. He's in grade 7. Both go to this fantastic school that I have learned a lot from. And I have a lot of gratitude for, because in the early years, I befriended the principal and the educators there. And they were kind enough to let me into their classrooms, their teacher meetings, and a lot of things, at Lead, I've learned from that school too. So I think I've become a better parent also because of this work, because I understand, or I read a lot about.
There are feedback loops running through our lives
Yes,
in more
yes,
ways
yes.
than
And in
one.
fact, my daughter actually has done a lot of curriculum creation work. At least she's interned 3 years in the summers at a row. She writes, so she's written some beautiful poems and texts for our kids at our school. So, yeah.
Let's switch gears here beyond Lead. I think you've given us a great understanding of how Lead works in the spaces that it works, etc. I want to talk about you as a person. What makes you get up after taking a knock and I'm sure you've taken a lot of knocks considering the space that you're targeting and the ambitious visions that you're setting for yourself.
Yeah. See, for me, I think the one thing that got me into this space was uh, a combination of experience of pain and then the energy of seeing a possibility. What I mean by that is the fact that there is lack of equity in education is a pain that
It's what
is
drives
there.
you.
Yeah. And kids are just full of possibilities. So when I look at that child and when I'm looking at those children, I just feel like there is not a single moment I can give up. Because if I give up, then we are giving up on our future generations. So for me, it's the kids, it's the classrooms. That is all that never allows me to give up. And whatever challenges, failures we come across, ultimately, everything that we are doing at Lead and I am personally doing is in the service of those children. So, we are parents. I'm a parent. You're a parent. We never give up. However sick, however unwell we are, we will do everything in our capacity to take care of our children. I see all children as my children. And to be honest, I think that is what keeps me going.
I know this is an unfair question because I'm asking you to imagine something, but do you think you and Sumit would have ever started, or you especially, would have started Lead if you were not a parent?
It's a tough one for me to answer because I can't imagine what it would been like. But it is very much true for me, particularly. I think Sumit would. I've known
Yeah, that's
him
why I
now for so
rephrased
many
because
years.
it
Yes,
looks like
he
he
would have
would have
anyways
started
gone in
it.
that
Yeah.
direction. For me, Zoya was the turning point. My own child was the turning
Because you
point.
said earlier, I mean, the way you look at other children changes
Yeah,
once you're a parent, because then you don't just see a child, you see a set of possibilities and opportunities, and you're wondering,
absolutely.
do they have the same
Absolutely.
ones?
And I think that's why I love children. I especially love working with very young children. I love whenever I'm visiting a school, my energy zone is the pre primary section. They are just bright eyed, they are always energetic. There is hope
And they're
because they've not
sponges,
been,
they're just
they're
absorbing.
sponges
Yeah.
and they are just also givers of love. And, I keep telling my daughter actually that I do what I do today all because of you, both because you coming in my life changed the way I started looking at the world, and secondly, a lot of work that I did with Zoya and the way she responded to it gave me a lot of positive energy that hey, kids are actually waiting for this, and this is possible. As I said, when I saw how she was reading, she was an avid reader by the time she was older, and my younger one actually, she did a lot of the teaching of reading in a lot of ways, right, through games and stuff. Uh, and when I saw that, and I was like, see, I've empowered this child for the rest of her life because wherever she goes, she's reading on her own, she's curious. And if that can be done for all children, why not? So I think for me, that is the energy. Uh, I'll give you an example of this, Rohin. When COVID had hit. I remember that, there was this morning when we got to know that Bangalore schools had shut down. It was 11th of March or something. And, Sumit and me were driving to work and we were still trying to figure out what's happening. And when the schools shut down in Bangalore, and our business was largely in the south at that time, we were partnering with some 700 schools at that point of time. Our first reaction was what happens to the kids? Because they're no longer in school, their end of year assessments are there, and they have to prep for the new academic year, and schools won't know what to do. So, what can we do about it? It was not business, it was not anything else. And in 5 days, literally, we launched Lead School at Home, which was an online class that our tutors were doing because our school teachers, I mean, we didn't have any time to communicate with our schools. And we basically started that. And in fact, that, of course, over 2 years became a whole online Lead School platform till COVID was there, which we, of course, shut down because we don't need it. But I think this example is just an anecdote to share. All of the decisions that we make come from the place of what is in the best interest of the child, how do we reach out to more children. Our sense of urgency to grow also comes from every year that we don't reach kids, it's like a generation lost. So how can we get there fast? And that just gives me immense energy. So that's
About
my driver.
when you talk about COVID and the generation lost, and there were all these reports that came out, which were fairly extensive, that talked about almost like the lost decade that many
Yeah,
countries
yeah,
like India and like developing countries would see, because of the 2 years where uh, children did not get a quality education vis-a-vis their peers in the rest of the world, and how it would set them back decades in terms of earnings, etc. And then
absolutely.
post schools reopening, there was talk of remedial action, etc., and all that. Do we have a sense of where we are today on that gap that opened up between kids in developing countries like India versus those either in the same countries but in better schools, or in developed countries?
Absolutely. See, India has suffered with learning gaps for a long while, even pre COVID. And many reports were issued. I mean, ACER being the most popular one, which has been showing us pre COVID also that we have at least a 2 to 3 year learning gap, at
Which essentially
large.
means that kids of similar ages are just
Yeah, so like a
much better.
grade 5 child, where they should be in terms of their skill set, they're actually 2 years behind. They're at grade 3 level. Now, our own data, because we're working with so many schools, and we start with the beginning of your assessment for a child to know where the child is so that we can actually personalize the learning journey for them. We have consistently, ever since the inception of LEAD, we have consistently seen that that gap is anything between 1.5 to 2 years in the affordable private school segment. So we were always designed to help the kids cover that gap. I gave you the example of English,
How do
our
you
math
benchmark this,
program.
since you're observing or testing the kids who are in your schools? How do you
Yeah. So
benchmark them
this is
again?
basically whatever the national standard says. NCRT is setting the national standard that a child at the at grade 2 level should be doing this.
All
We
right, so
have
it's against
standardized
the.
assessments that we make, and the school independently runs, and that data comes to us, and that data tells us where the learning gaps are. And then of course we have remedial programs, we have a bridge course, all of those things. And during COVID we actually created a lot of these things for our kids to do, to sort of bridge those gaps. But the point is that during COVID, of course, this got worse. And this basically, there was another 1.5 years of gap that came in. Now, I don't think the problem in India is new. So COVID only made it a little worse. We are very, very behind the world. And I think it's important that fundamentally the way we design solutions for schools and for children actually does factor in this reality that kids are behind where they should be, behind where the Indian national standard tells them. The moment I raise that standard to PISA, then we're talking about completely different gaps. And I don't think anyone has even measured that. Even today, I don't have data to measure that. But versus the Indian national standard, kids are 2.5 years behind. Now, what at least we've been able to do at LEAD is we, during COVID, created a bridge course. So, in a 10-day program, in a very targeted manner, we were able to, take kids who were, let's say, at that grade level only at 40% mastery. We were able to take them to 60% mastery so that all the prerequisite skills are taken care of before they move on to the next grade. And then, in any case, our programs are designed for kids who have these gaps to take them forward. And it worked well. But those who are not going to a lead partner school, this continues to be a challenge. That is the reason why all incoming schools and students into the lead program, pre-COVID or even now, have a 2 year gap, which we are dealing with constantly.
Is there any kind of a national priority program? I know we have a lot of priorities, but this never seems to register. It's
See, I think what's happened is that over the last 10 years, it's only when Pratham started publishing the Asar report, there was more quantitative data that started at least killing the debate that there is genuinely a learning gap. And so let's not debate about it. Let us at least start working to solving it. It has taken the government a long time to move in that direction. Largely, the Indian government has been very input focused. When I say input focused, infrastructure, schools should be there, toilets should be there, meals should be there. These are important, and these have taken the enrollment levels to around 95, 96%. But that's not enough. learning outcomes is the true gift we have to give our kids. We still have a lot of work to do. Now the government is making a shift with the national education policy. In intent it wants to move in that direction, but I have also seen very up close and personal that from the NEP policy document to execution is a big journey and a gap. And hence I feel that private players like us, I hope there are many more, but we all need to buckle up and do this job, because our ability to innovate, our ability to bring solutions with good amount of research and using technology is far better than the government's, because the government does not have that capability. And it'll be amazing if we find a path where the government partners with the
If I'm
private
not
sector
mistaken,
for
the
us to
budget
go there.
allocations for education have only come down over the last 10 years
Yeah.
or so. So it's not that the resources exist for even the government to be able to kind
Actually,
of.
the resources do exist, because this interesting fun fact is
No, I'm talking
at
about budgeted
budget
resources, not.
budgeted resources also they exist, and I'll tell you how. So, fun fact is we actually ran for government schools in our early days on a partnership model. We were trying to show to the Delhi government that it is possible even in your schools, for us to come up with a scalable model, but it didn't move much after a couple of years because the IS officer changed and the whole government bureaucracy sort of set in. Uh, the amount of operational expenditure that the government incurs on education per child is 4x more of what private schools do. 4x more.
I'm assuming a
So,
significant part of that is wasted.
a
It
significant
has
part
to
of it
be.
is wasted. So, for example, the schools, we still run our original schools. Our school charges around 20,000 fees per annum on an average, and we deliver very high quality learning with the lead solution. We make a little bit of profit on it so that we are able to invest in the school. The government, so our expenditure, let's say if we're taking 20,000 from the parent, our expenditure is maybe 18,000 per student for that quality. The government on an average spends anything, and now there are official data and there is not so official data. The range would be in 50,000 to 90,000 per student is the expenditure that goes from the government. So there is a lot of money there. There is a lot of money there. It goes in their infrastructure cost is significantly higher. They are building the same buildings uh, at a much larger cost. I can't say why. I think we
Of
all
course.
understand why.
Yeah.
Their teachers are paid a lot more. In the government school that we were running, the government teachers were paid a salary of maybe 70,000 per annum, which is a good salary. Sorry, 70,000 per month, which is a good salary. But unfortunately, many of the government teachers are not teaching. So they were not, at least in these four, they were not coming and teaching in the school. And so we placed our own private teachers who were at a much lower salary. This was in the heart of Delhi city, at 20,000 salary, and that teacher was teaching. And I think that is a systemic issue the government really needs to solve, because there is no teacher accountability. So the government is
There is no
spending
outcome accountability.
no outcome accountability,
But I
no
think it has
action
to flow down, right?
accountability.
I mean,
Yeah,
at a very high
of
level, if there
course.
is outcome accountability, then it will continue to trickle down to
Absolutely.
teacher
I think even
accountability.
simple action accountability. See, as an organization, when an employee shows up and does not do any work, we don't even wait for the outcome. We know that the employee is not working. But unfortunately, that part the government has not been able to solve. And I don't think there is lack of intent. I think there is intent. I've met so many IS officers and government officials who are very keen to make changes to the system. But it's just so deep inside, it
And
is
from
a
what you said, there
hard
are
problem to
roughly two
solve.
times the number of government schools and private schools.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the reasons why I was disillusioned in the first part of my journey, in the first 2 years, when I was doing the nonprofit and I actually moved away from nonprofit to setting up Lead, was it was too slow and it was so tough to change that system. And it was frustrating me. So I said, hey, let me try and do it in a way, in a place where, uh, you know, I have parents who are willing and outside of the government system. And that's when I realized, see, I didn't know all of this data, right, of number of schools and all of those things. I just saw these private schools also who were struggling. I said, okay, let's just go do that. Let me just set up a school. And then when we did that journey, we realized here is another large problem. But I think if there's one thing I would be very happy to do, and I hope I get the opportunity to, is somehow work with the government to make changes there.
I'm sure even within the government schools, there exists a strata of these schools are like, for example, the Kendriya Vidyalayas, many of the schools in Delhi,
Kendra
etc.
Vidyalayas,
Right?
of course,
Which is
are doing
so.
well.
How would that? If you were to look at the roughly 1 million government schools, what would that pyramid look like?
Within the government schools, see, I don't know exact numbers of Kendra Vidyalaya, but only Kendra Vidyalaya, army schools, some of these smaller segments will stand out. I think the numbers are small. The numbers are really small. Uh, Large scale, there still needs to be a lot of work that needs to be done. Now, some states are doing different things. Like, for example, Delhi government is trying to do something different. I've seen some action on ground, and it definitely seems to be
Test scores seem to
working.
have moved in Delhi, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken,
and
post
yeah,
intervention.
and especially the new government introduced some new systems. They are also trying to bring technology. There are some other states which are trying a few experiments. I know Maharashtra is trying some experiment. Now there is a stated intent to bring NEP to life. There is a stated intent from the central government to do what they call aspirational districts, and they are partnering with some non-profits. So I really hope that works. But I fundamentally believe that the answer maybe lies in the government not being the operator, the government actually playing the role
Being the
of a
funder
regulator
or
and the
the
funder.
funder.
Be the regulator, hold the operators accountable for outcomes. So operators like us can come in and say, hey, we'll run these schools for you. You pay us when you see outcomes. And I think those public private partnership models, I really hope at least start getting experimented. Many of them get talked in many rooms, but unfortunately, not a lot of action has happened. I mean, we keep pitching to multiple governments multiple times. But yeah, change in the government system has to go through multiple hoops, Rohin, unfortunately.
What's the split of responsibilities between you and Sumit as co-founders?
So it's been very organic with time. We've picked up things that needed to be picked up, and one of us just picked it up. But at least now, because we're a large organization, and the way we've split it is, or rather, at least there are some things we do in common. So we are co-CEOs now. Actually, that is also not a very common construct in India, is what I realized. So what that means is that there are certain strategic things and decisions we make together. We both think very differently, and hence we find it works better if we make these decisions together versus one person making it. Those are largely in terms of long-term strategy, next year strategy, goals, and things like that. I work a lot more with the product curriculum teams, and also basically all the central functions like finance, supply chain, all of these enabling functions. Sumit leads more of the direct functions in terms of his business teams, sales, field sort of functions tend to report to him. But now we have a leadership team, and many of them are independently handling their mandates. So we're not
What's
as
your span of
operational.
control? How many people do you have who report
I
to you?
think out of 1,500, from a structural reporting point of view, it would be half and half.
No, I mean, like, how many people directly report to you?
How many people directly report to me? See, right now is not a great time to ask me that question,
You
because
reorganization or
I have one or two. I'm one or two CXOs short right now, so I'm pretty much playing those roles. But yeah, I think I have 15, 16 people directly reporting to me, and Sumit also would have that. But in an ideal situation, I would say it should be six, seven people.
if
Seven
I were
leaders
to
should be
ask your
reporting to me.
direct reports to describe you using one adjective, what do you think might be the most common one that they'd use?
Uh, Very detail oriented. I think that's what they'll say.
What is it that you feel you add most value to lead as a co-founder and co-CEO?
I think I bring I would say two things or three things. I think one, I just live the mission all the time. So does Sumit, but I think I'm always the voice in the room on, hey, how is this helping the child? or this might be good business, but how is this helping the child? And I think that is the voice I always bring in every conversation. So I think that is one. I've never let us deviate from there. I am a missionary. Now, what that means is I do fundamentally believe that only if we deliver outcomes will we make money. And I cannot imagine a single situation where I have to choose money over outcomes. That's a choice I won't make. Because whenever the team feels we need to make the choice, I always will say, oh, well, we have to think harder. We're missing something here because we've got to deliver both. So I would say that is one. Second is I I never give up. I just never give up. And hence, through all the good times or bad times, I'm the one also who's saying, okay, so let's just work through it. And I will roll up my sleeves and get in. That is also why they call me detail oriented because I have the capacity to go in very deep in multiple things. So of course, my team does joke about the fact that you can't get past half baked stuff with Smita because she won't let it go. She will dig in and then she'll dig in, and so I think that is the other thing, and that whether you call it diligence or whether you call it deep thinking, I think that does bring out good quality thinking. So we're a little more prepared as we move forward. And yeah, third is, I mean, right now I'm the acting CFO, so I'm the money manager and I ensure the capital allocation happens well. So I also find ways for them to save money. So maybe that is the other third thing I
What are your
do.
views about wealth and how have they changed?
I think my own needs are actually fairly limited. I think that's the one thing that Sumit and me had a lot of resonance on, right? We had a number that we set out for ourselves 15 years back when we were young people working at PNG, and said at this level there is financial freedom because we were very clear about what our own personal needs were. And we achieved that financial freedom before we started Lead, which was good because Lead was, in a way, signed a pact with each other that if Lead never makes money, we're both happy. And we both signed that. And that, I think, has been the most powerful thing for us because we've never deviated from our mission. I think what wealth does is, and what has changed over time, especially as Lead grew, because we never imagined it would grow like this. It all just started happening. And we then said, hey, it is our responsibility to make something good out of this. Especially as we started raising money, we realized that actually this resonates with so many people. And that wealth means so much more access for students, so much more innovation that can come in. So the way I see that is basically wealth is an enabler to bring that equity, and that's the role I see myself playing at Lead. And one day, whenever there is exit personally for me, I think that's the role I see my personal wealth also playing. I think wealth means opportunity for those who don't have it, and that is how we must use it. You don't need much, to live a good life beyond a point, honestly. So, what more can one do with it?
You said something very interesting. You said both you and Sumit had a pact that even if Lead never makes money, you were cool with it. And that was okay for then. But now
Yes,
you've raised a significant
of
amount of
course,
venture
of course.
capital,
Yes,
and it is your responsibility now. It's a fiduciary responsibility for you
absolutely,
to provide returns and multiples. How do
absolutely.
you square the two now? Because now there is this,
See,
you
they,
know,
they, they were never in conflict. So, when we signed that pact, it was we will personally not make money out of Lead. But when we set up our school, we always looked at a business model that would work for that school. So it had to be self paying. We set it up as a for profit company, knowing very well that this can scale and this can actually outlive us only if it makes money for all the stakeholders. This is for the employees, it is for the investors, for the shareholders. So this pact was more for us, that if we don't make personally money out of this, we're fine.
I
Now,
appreciate that.
yeah, now, making money for our shareholders is absolutely our fiduciary responsibility, right? We've raised so much of money on this. Again, if I connect it back to something else I was saying earlier, that I fundamentally do believe that if we deliver student outcomes, we will make money. Now, it is in the decisions of the business model, right? I mean, when we, as we launched products, and when I say products, what I meant was when we started, we only were doing pre primary to certain grades. Now we do all the way up to grade 10. We have multiple types of boards and curriculums that we offer to schools. And now we are actually this year, we are launching beyond lead, we're launching two more brands with very differentiated offerings, because we've realized that schools in the same vicinity, don't two schools start competing with each other if both have lead, because their brand equity rides on lead. Now, I of course don't want to stop good education going from everyone, so differentiated solutions and stuff. So I think as we've done that, it's very first principles thinking, that you can't scale something that is loss making. You just can't. I never understood that when I saw that in a lot of companies. So
That's actually
yeah,
very important in the education space, because for the scale of the problem that this is in India, we still have this thinking that schools are not supposed to, on paper, schools are not supposed to make a profit,
unfortunately, we
right?
have that belief.
In hospitals, like in another area where, like, there are these, and this flows into regulation. It
Yes,
leads into a lot of structures which are designed to kind of, like, get around it.
yes,
But this permeates even with a lot of parents. I
absolutely.
want to ask you if
Yeah,
it's changed or not, because there is this thinking that schools are not they're not businesses. They shouldn't be making profits. Their objective is to educate children in the best. But, like,
yeah,
I don't know how this squares, because at the end of the day, if a school is not sustainable as a business, it cannot afford to pay its teachers. Those teachers are living in the real world. They have the opportunity to go to a different career where they'll get paid more, and they have their families to take care. This is a
yeah.
chain that runs all the way.
And this is in fact one of the most unfortunate things, because it has the collateral damage to this belief are the children, because then there is no room for innovation. There is no room for good teachers. Why are our teachers so poorly skilled? They are poorly skilled because of the fact that neither do they see value in
There
investing
are
in
no
themselves,
incentives.
and there are no incentives to learn and grow, and there is no money to learn and grow. If you actually see schools, and again, I'm always, when I'm sharing this, I'm always leaving out the top creamy layer of schools, right? Those are exceptions. Largely in India, you don't see schools invest in teachers learning. They don't directly invest in teachers learning. Now imagine you're running an organization and you
Which
don't
have
invest
trained the
in the
trainer
right.
programs. So
And
yeah.
if you're not investing in your people's growth, how do you expect them to deliver outcomes? Now they are not investing in their teachers learning because they are constrained for resources. Recently there was one of our partner schools where parents basically started sort of sitting outside saying, why are you taking a private publication? We want you to use the state board textbook. Now, here is actually a very unaware parent. It's really sad that the parent thinks like this. And unfortunately, the one to suffer will be the child. This is a problem in India. How do you solve it? It's a very deep problem. And I think the only way to solve it is more parental education and awareness. Educated parents will not think like that. Those who are not educated will think like that. And this is a tough one to solve. See, even at lead, we have found it difficult. In fact, recently Sumit has started this YouTube channel called Parenting Aajkal. It was basically to start driving a little more awareness. It has nothing to do with lead. He just runs this essentially for parents to understand that if you want the best for your child, your school has to innovate. Your school has to hire a good teacher. If the teacher is not paid the salary, then how is she going to be able to sustain? And why will good educated people come and become teachers? They won't become teachers if you don't pay them salaries.
I want to ask you a question and contrast this with what's happened with teachers in the test prep, IAS, IIT, JEE, where something at the other spectrum has happened. That each of them have started becoming brands in themselves,
gone to edtechs, YouTube channels, and have quote unquote become sometimes celebrities or mercenaries. In many ways, what we're seeing the correction there is a true recognition of what a good teacher brings to a large set of students.
Yeah.
I'm not saying something like that will happen within schools, because we are talking about teachers in the environment of their own schools. But that gap still exists. No
Yeah.
incentives, no recognition of what a good teacher can do within a school.
I think the biggest gap really exists in um, the parental awareness of when to invest in your child's life. Uh, Unfortunately, parents are investing when there is
When it's time
FOMO,
to
when it
crack an
is time to
exam,
crack an exam. I've had so many conversations with friends and parents like us who are very educated, who actually will say, why do I spend so much money on an international school? They afford it, right? Why do I spend so much money on an international school when my child is in pre-primary? If my
I'll think
child goes
about it
to
in class
college,
ninth
and
and
I'm like,
10th.
look, but actually the main development happens in these early formative years. So it is contrary to, it's like you're investing after you have already
It's
sort
like
of lost
preparing
hope.
for an exam the night before the exam.
Exactly. If you really have to invest as a parent, my advice to every single parent is invest early in your child. Great preschool, great primary school. Your child is going to be sorted. Most likely by the time they hit high school and entrance, they're not going to need you to spend so much money. So I think what's happening in the test prep segment is also highly inflated because of this fear of missing out. And it is sad to see, because again, see, most parents are not able to afford it, or parents and students land up borrowing so much money to pay for all this that, I mean, I don't think we're creating access with it. What is happening, unfortunately, is happening there. I think if I bring it back to schools that you were talking about, right? In schools, as long as the parent pays fees in the schools, even within the 20,000, very good education is possible. That is what we are trying to do. What the parent needs to do really, and my hope with parents is, give the school the autonomy. Don't start mandating and saying, oh, use X textbook or Y textbook. It's the educator in the school who knows this. Let the school principal decide. Let the teachers decide. Let them actually compare multiple players and pick the one that is really good. And that actually will bring more innovation in the ecosystem. So the capitalistic structure actually brings more innovation.
How does that
You know,
competition work? I mean, today between schools, let's say in a town or in a city, in a particular area, let's say there are 10 or 20 schools. What is the current setup where there is competition, like you mentioned capitalism? What is the capitalistic competition setup between schools to do better or to attract more parents and
see, for
children?
schools, the big differences are schools can, the biggest differentiator they have to provide is quality of learning. Now, they can do it in
How
two
do you do it?
ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Three ways, actually. One is the infrastructure that they're providing. So, a school which has multimodal, and when I say multimodal, it's three modes. It is visual, that means audiovisual is there. It is kinesthetic, that means there are teaching resources in the school. There are manipulatives. Learning math with manipulatives and with kinesthetic stuff is very different from just doing abstract math, right? So they have that, and they have the auditory, which is the books, right? So that school versus a school which only does auditory is one big differentiation that they'll bring. Second is the choice of curriculum that they'll make. You can choose a state board or a NCRT level of curriculum, but that is far behind where the rest of the world is. So that's where there are multiple players. Now, traditionally, there were more publishers. In the last few years, there were a lot of publishers who did a good job of bringing this. Now there is lead. There are a few other players, but largely working through publications who bring that. So school would choose that. That would be a big differentiation. So a school with lead will be very different from a school that uses a publisher. And they will actually showcase it to the parent. And the third layer really is the quality of teachers, which is what the school brings, where they hire and they train teachers. Now, if they're partnering with lead will train the teachers. If they're partnering with someone else, someone else will train the teachers. So this is how they compete with each other. And a parent will typically visit a school and speak to a few other parents, and this is how we will make that choice. I mean, this is how I made the choice for my own children. And now, if we just click one level deeper, schools then look at a menu of service providers or product providers to decide what's right for them. And lead is one of the solutions. Now, it's just that we ourselves have been school owners, and hence we take a very consultative approach to the school, where we actually first understand what their problems are and then offer them the right solutions, so that they're able to further showcase it to their parents. So on an average, actually, we've seen over a period of time, schools that partner with lead, average admission growth is 10 to 15%, and some of them double their admission in a matter of a year. Because now with lead, if they're getting the teachers to implement it well, the parent will see the difference.
But which is the limit that you said you'll hit earlier? Because now if you have two lead schools in
So
the
now
same
we're
area,
saying that, yeah, so now we're saying that ultimately the essence of all of this is very good pedagogy and high learning outcomes. So we're now creating multiple product lines so that the schools can differentiate. So they'll be basically working with different brands. That's the strategy we've taken towards growth.
tell us about your kids and their view of the world.
So, as teenagers, of course, their view of the world evolves. Both of them, I feel proud of the fact that, like Sumit and me, and both of them uh, take joy or see success in doing something that is meaningful for the world. So both of them that way are aware. Of course, they go through their anger and phases of frustration with what we adults seem to be doing with the world. They feel we're ruining it for them, especially as far as climate is concerned and things like that. So they are aware kids. But then now I think, especially my older one, as she's growing up, uh, we have been able to get her to see that uh, there are problems. So how are you going to be part of the solution? I think she started to think about how she's going to be part of the solution, and our younger one will get there. But I really hope for them that they one seek happiness from simple things and from their own learning. Right? Happiness never comes from achieved outcomes. Happiness comes from the journey. If you're learning and you feel joyful about it, you're happy. You may get there, you may not get there, and that's okay. So I really hope that happens for them. And I also do hope that they as individuals do make an impact in the world, where they'll end up doing something that improves lives of some people. And I think that's really needed. Uh, there's no meaning in just earning.
You've raised a lot of money for lead. I'm sure that came on the back of a lot of conversations with investors that ended up with them saying, not getting back to you, or saying, no, we will not invest.
Absolutely.
When you
Lot
look
more
back,
rejections. Yes.
when you look back at those rejections, what are some of the learnings that you'd like to give away to other entrepreneurs?
I think every rejection is a very important learning moment. I think my in fact advice to entrepreneurs is that uh, often I see entrepreneurs look at that rejection as sort of externalizing the issue, that they don't get it, they
Could you
don't
be more specific
understand.
with, I mean, without going into details of
Uh,
any particular investor, I mean,
no, like
something
for
that you.
example, I've heard entrepreneurs say that, oh, that investor doesn't get it.
No,
Oh,
no,
there
no. I
is
meant
this thing.
with
Yeah.
your own experiences
Hmm.
with lead, some of the investors who chose not to invest in you, when you reflect back on those, is there something that you could have done differently? I mean,
See, I
are there any
think,
reflections from there?
yeah, so see, it was a learning journey, right? Now, in that learning journey, one part of that learning journey was it is very important to understand their worldview and your worldview. And if they do not match, then you anyways don't belong together. Now, when you're listening to their worldview, uh, think about whether there are bits for you to take away, because it's expanding your worldview. There have been some interesting thoughts that have come up in those conversations, which are now part of the lead journey. Every bit of those conversations have made us richer, I would say. Sometimes the worldviews are very different. The example I take is some investor, actually, he was very kind enough to write to us and say that you should change your business model. from B to B to B to C, because no one has ever made a big business with schools. And we very politely, shared that we appreciate your care that you've written to us. Our worldview is different. Our worldview is that schools is where transformation is needed, and just because others have not succeeded does not mean no one can succeed, because we're not willing to give up on this, and we continue. And that, I think, gave us energy, that there are non-believers, and I don't wrong them, but they're non-believers, and we move on. So I think there are multiple things that we've learned. There are lots of questions that they ask you sometimes on your business model. There are people who've looked at our business model and at different phases have told us, you guys are not ready for us, because this needs to be improved. That was very valuable input. Um, the global benchmarks, actually, that we started learning from, came through investor conversations. It was a good investor friend who first heard our model and then said, oh, this sounds like X company in Brazil. And we were like, oh, we've never heard about it. And when we eventually connected with it is this company called Arco in Brazil, and when we connected with the Arco founder, Ari, like, our stories were as if, like, we say kumbh ke mele mein, but siblings are, we like,
Right.
my God, identical stories, just over two generations there. His parents used to run a school, and then he created a system out of it, and we just did it in a shorter lifespan. And there was just so much to learn. Now, that investor never eventually invested in us, but I think opened a world of things for us to learn. So there are a lot of things on unit economics, on the model, on scaling, that we've learned through these investor conversations and these rejections. So yeah, so I think I was just making the point that, sometimes, and I get asked this question sometimes, that, oh, do you, it's a very cliched question, but asked often. Did you feel that you were rejected because of your gender? I was like, actually, I didn't feel it, because I never looked at it through that lens. So even if someone rejected me because I was a female entrepreneur, I would never know. And I don't care for it, because I don't think there's any learning for me there. I'm not changing my gender. I'm the same person. So if someone has rejected me for that, it's their problem. But there is no point of trying to look at it through that lens. So I've never looked at it through the lens of, oh, they don't get it, or is it because of gender, or is it because of bias? No, it is not. Someone is not resonating with you. Try and understand why. Take out what is there for you to learn and move on.
I'm going to ask you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 as a CEO and as a parent.
CEO and as a parent. Okay. I will ensure that my children don't listen to this, because I'm sure they will massacre the ratings. I would rate myself as an 8 as a CEO, and 9 as a parent. I would rate Sumit maybe better as both a CEO and a parent, if I'm being very honest.
What does personal time look like for you?
Personal time, actually, I don't do. I,
Does it exist, personal time?
I love what I do. This is my life. This truly is my life, Rohin. So for me, personal time is also about lead, about what more can we do for our kids. Are there programs? What is happening in the world? Can I visit some schools? What more is happening? Can I read? So that is what personal time is. Of course, personal time is apart from lead and really, or rather, education and what can be done and reading about it and things like that. Kids, my two children, are the only other part of my life. Between these three children, I'm very happy,
I
and
think
and
you're
I
the
and I love
third
doing
or
that.
fourth founder I've spoken to on First Principles who's used the exact same phrasing of between these children,
Yeah.
between my real
It
children
is,
and
yeah, it
my
is like,
company, which is a child.
as an entrepreneur, it is very much like that, right? And that's why, even when you asked me on days of failure or tough days, you never give up. You just don't. It doesn't even occur to you as an option. It's not an option on the table.
Doing what makes you lose sense of all time?
Creating curriculum, by far, I just love it. uh, and I was recently talking to my curriculum team, and I told them, I said, I'm saying this in private, but yours is the job I love the most. And Sumit and me fought very hard for this one. but it logically made sense for the curriculum team to work with me. But yeah, that's the part I love most. So I still review our books. When I'm reading them, there is a loss of loss of sense of time, and you say flow, right? Like that is
Yeah.
real flow.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with your life?
Or 9, 9.5. I love my life. I think I'm very fortunate that I get to do what I really love doing, uh, and I get to make an impact. I get to see these kids. It's just joy to be in school with these children. And in the process, I am building an institution. I think I'm just very, very fortunate. It's a privilege which I don't take lightly at all. I think there is a responsibility to be held here. So I couldn't have asked for anything better.
Thank you so much for your time, Smita. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Rohin. Thank you.